Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect and to the Season 3 finale of this podcast. In this final episode, before I take a break for the summer, we are going to go out with a bang by bringing back one of the most respected and influential cognitive psychologists in the world, Paul Kirschner. Before we go over to Paul, I wanted to thank all of you for supporting me and this show. This season, I was able to interview 31 fabulous guests, and I hope that their insights and research help you grow and perhaps even improve your teaching. You'll be happy to know that, along the way, the number of listeners of Progressively Incorrect has grown exponentially, which has led to a lot of opportunities for me. John Catt from Hodder Education became a sponsor of this show, and at about the same time, I signed with them to write a book. It may be too early to share this, I don't know, but the book is titled Just Tell Them, and it is all about how to model and explain your content area explicitly and directly. If you go to the show notes of this episode, you'll find an early design of the cover art, which has a nice pop art vibe that I really like. Look out for the release of Just Tell Them, the Art and Science of Explanation, sometime next school year. My other announcement is that after taking a long walk in the meadow, I've decided to quit my day job to give full-time consulting a try. Schools have been asking me for the past 2 years to help them bring evidence-informed practices to their teachers, but I've been unable to accommodate all of the requests while also having to report to a brick-and-mortar building. While it was hard to say goodbye to my middle school and all the wonderful people that work there, I'm excited about the new adventure ahead of me. My August is already packed with training gigs in North Carolina, Colorado, and New York, and I will be keynoting at Research Ed Chile in the fall, among several other opportunities. In shifting my time and energy to this work, I hope to be able to play a larger role in improving learning and instruction across this country. All right, that's enough from me. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Kirschner back onto the show to update us on the latest debates over inquiry and explicit instruction. Hello, Paul Kirschner. How are you doing?
Okay, Zach, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm calling in from the Seattle area. Where are you calling us from?
The seaside in the Netherlands.
The Netherlands has some water, huh?
Yeah, a lot of water, as a matter of fact. About 1/3 of the Netherlands was water once.
That's great. Are you you were on the show before. A lot of people know this. By the way, it's like the most popular episode, and it helped launch this podcast. And here you are on the second time. So we're gonna catch up and we're gonna talk about some of the things that's happened in the last couple years. Are you ready?
Okay. Ready when you are.
So one of the main things I want to talk about is just this article that came out that was in response to another article that started by Lin Zhang and colleagues.
Yeah.
And how about it? That one's titled, There is an Evidence Crisis in Science Educational Policy. I think it's a really important article that sort of relates to the responses. I thought we'd start there and you could kind of launch us.
I don't think it relates to the response, but not very well. But yeah, it's a very simple article, actually. What we're saying in the article itself is that educational policy, is often primarily based upon what we call program studies. Those are studies in which 50 different variables are manipulated, in which for us it's impossible to determine whether that which you are propagating, inquiry-based learning for learning, discovery-based learning, whatever you want to call it, whether that is actually instrumental in what was found, because there are so many other things being manipulated all at the same time. So we said is, okay, you have that type of research, program studies. There you see, okay, we'll do this with 20 different things, and we'll do that, and we'll compare them. And you can't say which of those 20 things actually made any difference. And we said, okay, you can use that if you want to, But there are also two other types of studies that you should look at as policymakers, and those are correlational studies and good empirical studies. That was just our basic idea in this, in saying policymakers don't stare blindly at these program studies in which everything, including the kitchen sink, is added to it, because you don't know if it's A or B or C or D. And if you have to do all of those things or only one of those things, and what happens if you leave one of those things out? We said, now you have to go broader than just those program studies. And for some strange reason, they took offense to that. I'd almost say the usual suspects took offense to that and came up with a reply to it.
It's like, before we go to that reply, a lot of times people will send me a programmatic study in that shows that for them at least that project-based learning worked.
Right.
In that article, I noticed that it was mentioned kind of one of the problems with that, in addition to you're not controlling variables, right? You're not varying only one thing at a time. But
Right.
in addition, you get a situation where there's a lot of training and excitement around that program. And what happens is that perhaps it's actually due to the increase in resources and training and not actually to the intervention itself.
Yeah, but that you could say that's all part of the intervention, or not the intervention itself. But you can call it the Hawthorne effect. You can say all the added resources. The teachers are often receive specific training in that. They possibly know their own field better after receiving the training. Often the schools know that they're getting something different. They're also getting additional resources to do that. The kids all of a sudden see, hey, everything is different. So there are all of these novelty effects, Hawthorne effects, added resources, added training for the teachers. All of these things can play a role if anything is found. And you have no idea what of all of those things. Maybe if you just gave teachers, I compare it to research that used to be done about problem-based learning. In that research, and I won't mention any names, and I'm going to discuss it in a way that makes it look completely absurd, yeah, but it's actually very close to what happens. They had two groups. One group that had to try to refresh their memories collectively with respect to a specific topic. So you'd have 7 or 8 or 9 people talking about the circulatory system and what they remember from high school and how it works, and aortas and exterior vena cavas and different parts of the heart and all of those types of things. And you had another that refreshed their memory on something having nothing to do with the circulatory system. Okay? And what they showed at the end is that if you bring back your memories, you refresh your memories with respect to the topic, you learn better. So great, yeah? I mean, if the other group refreshed their memory on knitting, but the problems you had to solve related to the circulatory system, I would say it's very normal that that group would do better. But what they didn't compare it to is if you gave, instead of having them spending an hour trying to remember what they had learned in high school about the circulatory system, and gave them a good lecture for an hour on the circulatory system, or you gave them a really good video with animations of how the heart works and how arteries and veins work, would that have been better than refreshing your memory? But that's not included in the research. So, of course, yes, refreshing your memory about the topic that you're having to deal with is better than not doing it at all. But for me, it's important if you spend an hour working with others, trying to remember what you had in high school on the circulatory system, then compare that to a good hour-long lecture, or even less, on the circulatory system, or a good video, or a good simulation, or whatever. Compare it to another instructional approach in which you learn something about the circulatory system and not about knitting.
And what you're getting at too is this idea of, and we learn about this in like research methods class, is when the comparison group is business as usual. And I think a lot of times it's almost dishonest. I feel like they say that the business as usual is traditional instruction, but what happens is we don't know what happened in the business as usual. We don't know if it's just bad inquiry based instruction, right? And now we're comparing something that is an intervention with novelty effects to something that we cannot pinpoint what happened in that other side.
I mean, I can't say it better than you did. So thank you very, very much, Zach. You want to change roles? I'll ask you the questions. You give me the answers. No, but there are so many things wrong with it, with program studies and in comparison between two programs, that you can't base policy decisions on bad research. It's just that simple. And so you need to augment that, at the least augment it with good research, either good correlational research, which you can't show anything causal, but you can get a good idea with a larger group as to how something works, but also good theory-based empirical research in which you isolate the difference between two different learning environments. And if you don't do that, you have no idea what might have caused what. And you often see that. That means, in order to have it work, do we have to spend all of that money and do all of those things to achieve it? Or maybe one of those things was the determining factor, and we only have to do that, and we can leave out all of the rest and get the same results. We have no idea. And if you get no results from a program-based study, you have no idea if that was because the program was bad or that one thing in the program canceled out something else in the program. So it doesn't give you any information except that it's done in a ecologically valid environment. That's the only thing it tells you.
Do you think there's a role in like lots of these program studies kind of being added together over time, kind of mushed together into an effect size, and then we compare a lot of these studies to a lot of other types of studies, and then like kind of make a determination off an effect size?
Yeah, I mean we discussed that actually in our reply to the article, to the de Jong article, in which we say that's one of the major problems with the meta studies. You have absolutely no idea what went on. All of these things are mushed together. That's the major criticism of the work by John Hattie and others. And then you see that the people who are commenting on that meta studies aren't good, and de Jong et al. In their article said that, and at the same time, to prove their point, made use of those same meta studies and cherry-picked those that had shown positive results. So it's kind of like I found it a non-discussion. When I read their response, Let's Talk Evidence, I found it to be a theory-free article. There was absolutely no theory behind why inquiry-based learning could or should work, whereas we make use of cognitive load theory and evolutionary psychology to prove our point. I mean, there are two ways that you can gain new knowledge. You can either find it out for yourself, which is not effective and not efficient, or you can have someone else tell it to you. And that makes us unique as a species. And it seems like, based on no theory at all, those authors say, but inquiry learning is better. And my question is, why? Why is then inquiry based upon what? Based upon what theory? And then they say, well, of course, there's guidance in this and that. I once wrote an article in which I said, like what happened to the inquiry and inquiry-based learning, because it was, primarily a lot of support and guidance with some time to do it yourself. Well, I say that if you look at Rosenshine, no, that's very good explicit instruction. So sometimes I have no idea what these people what people are talking about.
So what you're getting at is the second round, I guess, maybe the third. I don't know how many rounds there's been, but I think of it, for me, I first encountered it with the 2006 Kirschner, Sweller, and Clark
Yeah,
article. And
yeah,
then I read the book Constructivist Teaching,
yeah.
Success or Failure, which is kind of like this big tome that has debate back and forth between the researchers. And now De Jong et al. Write an article titled "Let's Talk Evidence: The Case for Combining Inquiry Learning and Direct Instruction." Uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
What's now wrong with that? We said let's make our decisions based upon good research. So I was just completely amazed. We always say is there's an evidence crisis. And we didn't say one is better than the other. We said if you want to implement something, make use of good research to implement it. And what we say is we integrate in we indicate that a particular category of research, program-based studies, has dominated the formulation of educational standards, while a large number of critical findings from randomized controlled studies and correlation studies that overwhelmingly show minimal support for the suggested policy have been marked as irrelevant and excluded. The current blanket emphasis on program-based studies at the expense of other types of research is misplaced. I mean, I don't know how you can be less controversial than that.
yeah, like I said, it's like the first thing you learn when you start your PhD is
Exactly.
kind of like dealing with different research
Well, it
methodologies.
should be in Methodology 101.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. We even
Um,
make a point of that in our reply to it. I found it actually very nice, but also, let's call it a little bit snarky, in which we state that I won't read it, in which we say that those people who say that students should be taught good methodology don't use good methodology themselves in their own research. Yeah, that's what it comes down to sometimes.
so let's talk about their argument. We've already kind of mentioned it's theory free, which I want to get back to that. I think it's really important. But this is, for me, it's kind of like the fallacy of the middle ground is kind of the whole piece where we can put them together and that will be better than some undefined version of direct instruction. I mean, what were your problems with their arguments? And if you could outline them a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
If you say that you should make use of something, you also have to say when and why and how. And that's based upon theory. So, for example, in cognitive load theory, we say inquiry might work well and probably does work well with experts, but doesn't work well with novices. And we have a whole theoretical basis as to why that's the case. And it's called the expertise reversal effect. And we can say, in this situation, that works. And in this situation, that works. But if you do it theory free, all you can say is, we tried it and we found this. But you can't tell me when it will work and when it won't work, where it will work and where it won't work, when you need explicit instruction and when you can make use of inquiry. Those things aren't in the equation. And that's our major problem with their reply, is that it's all based upon, we did something in a program study, it worked, and thus. And we say, give me the theory that will tell you when it worked, why it worked, when it won't work, how it works, those types of things. And we don't see that in the article, in the reply.
I almost wonder, I'm like you can't read people's minds. There's also like 40 authors on that paper.
Right. Yeah. As I said, the usual suspects.
You can't read people's minds, but I'm trying to be charitable here. Like, I wonder if it's just because this kind of hyper individualistic kind of perspective where every child is different, everyone has a different level of curiosity, personal interest, so you can never know. So you just got to kind of get to know your kids, as they say, and that's about it. I don't know.
I understand that up to a certain point. but I often give the example of yes, everybody's different. Okay, no two people, no two kids are the same, but deep down at a foundation level, they're all exactly the same. They have the same skeletal system. They have the same digestive system. They have the same circulatory system. They have the same nervous system. And of course, one person is better trained than the other. So we'll have a lower heart rate, we'll have a larger lung volume, and all of those types of things. And the training that you use might be different, but it's based upon a yeah, how do I say this in English? It's based upon a general inkling of how those systems work, those basic systems. Now, learning is based upon our cognitive architecture. We have a sensory memory, we have a working memory, which is fairly limited, very limited, and we have a long-term memory, which is virtually inexhaustible. Make use of that and tell me what in inquiry-based learning, how that interacts with our cognitive architecture. The same way I would say, how does ice cream interact with our digestive system and cause us to get fatter? Yeah? Or how does lung fibrosis cause our lungs to function less well? Give me the theoretical basis underneath it so that I can understand. If I look at our working memory, sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory, how, when, why, and where inquiry learning fits into that. Because even if everybody is different, granted, we have different prior knowledge. That's why I've always said constructivism is an incredibly good philosophy. Constructivism is in philosophy that says the way I experience the world is different from the way you experience the world. Because I have different experiences in the past, and you, Zach, have different experiences. So when we look at the same thing, we see it and interpret it differently. Great. Constructivism, great philosophy, but it's not the basis for a theory of teaching or learning that tells us actually nothing about it. Now, luckily, de Jong and colleagues have no longer used the word constructivism in it, in the article, but it's all on inquiry learning. Now, tell me, please, how our cognitive architecture, tell me, please, how evolutionary psychology plays a role in learning effectively in that way. All I can see is that inquiry learning without knowledge, without the prerequisite prior knowledge gained from explicit instruction, is based upon the randomness as generation principle. I know nothing about it, so I'll try this and I'll try that and I'll try the other thing. While explicit instruction is based upon the idea of we as a species are incredibly good at transferring knowledge from one person to the other, first by telling them, then we had writing, now we have other media. Explain to me how inquiry learning plays into that. I mean, I don't want to spend an hour critiquing because we spent weeks writing the article and then replying to the article. I say to people, maybe you can put it in the show notes because they're all open access, and let people just read it themselves. Let them read the article that there's an evidence crisis, have them then read the article, let's talk evidence, and finally read our response, and let them decide for themselves whether or not we have a point. Because, yeah, it's not fair to the other people. We can't have a debate about it. So I say the only thing we can do is look at the original article, their response to it, and our response to their response. We call that in Dutch a repliek and a dupliek, and have people themselves read it and decide for themselves.
Perfect. And so coming on, so leaving the article, but it's leaving the debate, but it's in there. You're right. They don't have the right to respond, right? Of course,
Yeah.
they can message me anytime. There is a new area of research that's sort of developing called productive failure. I've wanted to ask you this for a long time because I've tried to make a sense of the research, and I have a pretty good idea, I think, of where we're at with that. What productive failure? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think we should have productive success. It's just that simple. People confuse productive failure with desirable difficulties. The idea that in order to succeed, you first need to fail, I have no idea what that's based upon. I once heard a lecture by the person who came up with that idea, and he discussed all different types of research that didn't show that productive failure worked. And his answer to that was they implemented it improperly. Okay, if you're the only person that can implement productive failure in a way that is productive, then I don't think it's anything that can be used by teachers. Yeah? And I can't, for myself, understand why failure should lead to more success. What I know for myself is that research shows that success leads to motivation to continue. Success leads to more success, and failing often ends to demotivation or amotivation. And I think, why do you want to let a student experience not being able to do something if you want that person to be able to do something? Show them how to do it properly. Show a child how to properly kick a football, or as you would call it, a soccer ball, so that it gets a curve in it, so that it goes around the row of defenders, instead of having them try to find out for themselves how to kick the ball and get a spin on it so that it goes around a row of defenders. And any good trainer will then walk up to that child and say, well, you plant this foot there and you hit it with that side of your foot in order to get a spin on it. They don't discuss the aerodynamics of it and why the ball has both pentagons and hexagons on it, and that if you hit it in this way, you have a Venturi effect in which you get a curve on it. Yeah, no baseball coach is going to discuss that when he says, well, hold your hand on the seams and turn your wrist when you let go of it, and you'll get a curve in the ball. But if you have to discover it yourself, at the end of a day of throwing the ball and getting no curve on it, your shoulder will hurt, your wrist will hurt, and you'll have the idea, I'm never going to be a pitcher because I can't get the ball to curve. I'm never going to kick the free kick because I can't get the soccer ball to curve. Teach them properly and let them experience success so that they're motivated to continue. I can't think of a better way. And that's based upon research on motivation. Yeah? So there's also a theoretical basis for that. I don't know what the theoretical basis is underlying productive failure, other than that we learn from our mistakes. Yeah, hello. Yeah. But I think most of us who've learned from our mistakes would have preferred to have gotten it right in the first place.
And what's curious is that, like, I know in the recent kind of meta-analysis by Kapoor, like he says, and he said in subsequent things, that he just doesn't think it probably works that well for procedures, but that productive failure works for concepts. And yet I'm confused whether or not I'm not sure whether or not conceptual knowledge is properly defined or it's well measured in these studies.
I have no idea. All I know is that most, if not all, of the studies that show that productive failure works have been done by a certain person who's responsible for the idea of productive failure. And if you look at the meta-analyses, it's primarily research by that person. And where it doesn't work, that person wasn't involved. Every time I hear of an instructional technique or intervention, my first question is, what is the theoretical basis underlying what you've done, why it should work, that will explain the results? And I don't know what that is in productive failure. And I don't know why it would work better for concepts than it would for procedures. I just don't know. So, yeah, what am I going to say about that? Yeah,
I think it's curious because
I think you're trying to get me to say nasty things about
no, 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 no.
my fellow researchers, and
No,
I'm
no, no.
trying my best not to say nasty things about them.
Well, I I almost wonder if any time something like just trying to do something for a short amount of time followed by explicit instruction where you actually tell them, show them how to do it. By the way, Greg Ashman did a way better controlled study
Exactly.
that showed the opposite effect, and all of
Yeah.
these are sort of weaker designs where they vary more than one thing at a time, right? The other one they compare.
Which means throw it out, throw
Yeah,
it away.
right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering maybe it's something related to like a goal-free effect or a pre-testing effect where it
Yeah, but
forces them.
you have a goal. If you're trying to solve a problem, goal-free effect is with respect to cognitive load has very little. What you say is, I have this. What can you do with it? I'm not having them try to solve things. You can't fail in a goal-free situation because by definition there's no goal, so you can't fail. So I have no idea. Yeah, I can't. I can't compare it to that or say it has something to do with that, because in order to have productive failure, you have to be working towards a goal in order to fail. But if you have a goal-free situation, there is no goal, so you can't fail. It's just that simple. I mean, that's logic, in my opinion.
And you know, I just have this, I say this every time, and this isn't good enough evidence against productive failure, but I just see so many situations in classrooms where the teacher reverses the order and says, hey, try something out with your group. And within just minutes, it turns to chaos. It turns
Yeah.
to kids eloping, kids breaking their pencils, kids not trying any longer. And what does the teacher do? They go, whoop, 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 and come on back, everyone. And all of a sudden, we're teaching explicitly, and the whole exercise was itself a failure.
Yeah,
Not
but I
productive
mean,
at
for
all.
me, why not explain something explicitly? Give the child the chance to make use of what they've learned and have success, and then increase the difficulty to a point where they might fail, and then say, okay, ask then epistemological questions. Why didn't it work here? What did you need to know in order to? Yeah. And then I'll teach it to you. I have no problem with, yeah, zone of proximal development, although it's a developmental psychological theory and not a learning theory. I have no problem with that. But the idea is, in order to solve a problem, you first need knowledge. And anytime you give someone a problem and they don't have the knowledge, the chances near 100% that they're going to fail. I said, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to waste the time? Why do you want to waste the motivation? If you get them far enough that they're motivated to learn, which you as a teacher know is hard as hell, yeah? Why would the first thing that you do be something that could demotivate them? Yeah? And why would you then say, so I gave you explicitly a question that you'd fail on so that I could explain it to you? If I was a kid, I'd say, what the heck is wrong with you, Mr. Groeschel? First teach us it, and then let us work with it.
And you know, this is less known internationally, but here, because of the NCTM, because of the California math framework and all this other stuff, there's actually another thing called productive struggle. And this one, in almost every definition, there is no explicit instruction phase. So we've like moved actually past the Kapoor research, which I think is a legitimate, you know, body of it's an attempt to show something but it always includes the explicit instruction phase. Where this productive struggle one is just discovery, is basically just discovery learning at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And there are types of productive struggles, but we call that desirable difficulties. Yeah. And that's something completely different from productive struggle. What we do with desirable difficulties is we try to design the study situation in such a way that you have to think harder about it. Not that it's more difficult to solve, but you have to think harder about it. Bjork, Elizabeth and Robert say it's making things harder, but in a good way. The same way a good coach will have their runners run up the steps of the stadium as quickly as possible, so that they build, or 2 or 3 steps at a time, to build up their lung volume, to build up the strength in their legs, so they eventually can run harder. The difficulty is, in that respect, desirable. But what's desirable about the struggle? That you've experienced struggle and you've overcome it? Yeah, that's okay. That's not my idea of how we should be teaching.
And they always seem to go not in the cognitive or behavioral studies to support it. They go to some sort of neuroscientific something or another where they talk about, they talk about brain scans. I'm not entirely sure that they've read or understood, and they show that the struggle is there because there's like all these flashing, or something in this. I mean, have you seen this?
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I can also discuss things at the level of quanta in physics, but that's not going to tell me how my car works better. Or, okay, we see flashes, and there's more blood going there. And does that mean they're learning better? That it's led to more effective, more efficient, deeper learning? For me, neuro is a little bit too far away from implementation. Yeah, there's not very much that I see in neuro that helps me with implementing. Maybe in 5 or 10 or 15 years, we'll have reached that stage. But at the moment, there's very little that I gain from that, which tells me how I can teach better or how students learn better. And knowing that more blood is going somewhere in your head doesn't give me any information on whether or not that leads to better learning.
It's curious because the same people saying this are also really afraid of anxiety. they talk about anxiety all the time when it comes to time tests, mostly.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden it's okay to have a student who already might have a learning history in which they failed in other classes. They may come to class with a weaker working memory or less prior knowledge or less family investment. They may have themselves lots of trauma, and they come into class and the teacher says, "I'm going to withhold all this guidance," and all of a sudden that's good teaching.
Yeah, I find you. I think that's a very good synopsis. Thank you very much. Would you write that down, please, and send it to me?
Before we go, I wanted to end the show on talking about instructional design. A lot of people in education, they kind of aren't aware that there's a whole other world out there, and that's what my degree is. And unfortunately, one of your colleagues recently passed away, Jerome Marienboer, who
his name is Jeroen van Marienboer. He wasn't only a colleague, he was a very dear friend of mine, a co-author of many papers and books. And that was a heavy experience losing him.
And you two work together on several books, like the 10 Steps to Complex Learning, and 4CID is it's in business training models, in medical training settings. How was it to be able to have that in your life, like a collaborator who you could kind of bounce ideas off of?
He was more than a collaborator. He was more a teacher. He was more the Zen master, and I was sometimes grasshopper. Yeah, that type of thing. Jeroen is one of the 4 or 5, or was one of the 4 or 5 people that I really admire and look up to. And it was incredible working with him. it was also incredible sitting and having a beer with him, or going to the European Speed Skating Championships in Budapest with him and his wife and my wife. But he was just an incredible person to work with. He thought more deeply than you could conceive of as being possible, and always was nuanced. He was a great teacher, a fine person, and yeah, I miss him every day. Yesterday, I was busy with the 4th edition of the book, which we worked together almost until the week before he passed on, and with a third author, and I was busy with the proofs of the book. And when I looked at the proofs, it was kind of like, boy, did I learn a lot from you.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. I from a distance also felt really sad, because right, these are things like when you're learning about instructional design, they're just part of the literature, right? And
I mean, it's just like John Sweller. He's also one of the people I look up to, and it's incredible to talk to him and to spar with him about ideas. For example, when we made the step from cognitive load theory now to collaborative cognitive load theory, yeah, and just hitting that ping pong ball back and forth. Jeroen, just like John Sweller in '88 came up with the idea of cognitive load theory, Jeroen came up with this idea in the '90s of 4-component instructional design, and that you go from simple to complex tasks organized in task classes with supportive information and fading guidance of procedural information, and when necessary, part-task practice. That idea of holistic, but not holistic in the way of inquiry-based. It's incredibly explicit in the instruction in it, and it's based upon cognitive psychology and good cognitive psychology, but it's a completely different way of looking how to design something, instead of the idea of we teach you a lot of facts and hope at the end you can put it together and make something bigger from it. It says, let's begin with the whole task in its most simple form, so that going along the way, making it increasingly complex, you learn more and more. We teach you more and more. It was a phenomenal idea. It was groundbreaking, and it leads to things like most traditional education, to teach knowledge, skills, attitudes, is to do it separately. But that hinders complex learning and competence development, because complex learning is that you can make use all of those things in the situation that you need to make use of them. That's called compartmentalization. 4CID works against compartmentalization. Fragmentation, the idea that you analyze a domain and you bring it back into the smallest little atoms and teach those atoms, so that at a certain point, those atoms combine and make a galaxy. They don't. The sum is more than, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So that idea of fragmentation, it also works against that. And it leads to better transfer, because we say in it, you have to vary the situations. Yeah. So don't learn A, B, B, C, but vary them so that you learn at a conceptual level what are things that look the same on the surface, but are different at the conceptual level, and what are things that look different at the surface level, but are the same at the conceptual level. Now, those three aspects, transfer, non-fragmentation, and non-compartmentalization, that's not for me, that's pure Jeroen, and I find pure genius. Yeah, And it's some ways analogous to Dave Merrill's Pebble in the Pond, but he's very explicit in how you make use of task complexity. In that aspect, it makes use of a lot of cognitive load theory in it, and that's of course to be expected from Jeroen. I met John Sweller through Jeroen, as a matter of fact, and it says, if you want to learn, don't overload the working memory. So begin with tasks that aren't complex, that don't overload your working memory. That doesn't mean they're easy. It means that they're not complex, that there are less elements that are interacting with each other, fewer elements, and less interaction between the elements. So begin with a simple, not an easy task, a simple task, and then slowly but surely add complexity to it until you reach your final goal state of what you want the person to be able to do. Now, that's for me pure genius. And it's working with him, was a unique experience. And I find it every day a pity that I just can't call Jeroen up and bounce some things off of his brain.
Yeah, and I mean, and think about how that applies to teacher training, where
Yeah.
you get a PD. This is how it typically is, right? You get some sort of PD, and we're talking about something over here, and then you go back into the classroom, and it's actually a whole different ball game, a whole different set of things, and you've essentially the teacher is not able to integrate the two, and there's no none of those features of that design model are really followed
No.
at all.
It's what it's done is it breaks it down from what is it in its atoms, and we're going to teach you all of those atoms and hope that you can apply it. Whereas for component instructional design and the 10 steps, the idea behind that is you begin with the whole task. You do a cognitive task analysis of what the expert does and needs to do. And based upon that, you build your instruction, you design your instruction based upon that. And that means really looking deeply at what, not an experienced, but what an expert teacher does. And then saying, and how do we then achieve the point of becoming an expert teacher? And you then go down to the lowest level of complexity and you present that. But you're talking about PD, but that's usually a 1 or a 2 day course. For component instructional design, the 10 steps, and I would say it has to fulfill 2 requirements. The first requirement is that you have enough time to do it, because you have to go through task classes of increasing complexity in it. That's endemic to it. The second is it has to be something where you say at the end, somebody can do this or that. A good example of that is I would never suggest someone use 4CID for a high school course in chemistry, because the goal of that chemistry is that at the end, you know this and you can carry out that procedure. I would say use it if you're setting up a 4-year university course. The National Council on Teacher Quality did some really nice research and showed that initial teacher training is not very good. Yeah, they showed that the textbooks being used and what's being taught there is not based upon good cognitive psychological theories and strategies that should be used in teaching. So we're beginning with our professional development with a group of teachers that weren't properly trained. It's kind of like if I have a doctor, I want that doctor to have initial training in anatomy, physiology, pathology, biology, based upon the current state of science. And then I want that person afterwards to keep abreast of new ideas, new techniques, new interventions, new surgical techniques, new pills, whatever, in professional development after that. But I want them to have that good basic knowledge before they start. And I think, and even from what I've seen from teacher training situations, this initial teacher training is that I can't say that there's a good initial teacher training curriculum based upon good science, where those who are following it come out with the basic qualifications that they need in order to teach well. If they have that, then the next step is professional development, making sure that they are on top of things for the next 40 years, just like a lawyer or a doctor. But lawyers have standard curriculums or curricula and are judged on that. Doctors too, but teachers aren't. There's no standard curriculum. No self-respecting medical college will say, well, we're not going to handle biology. And there's no law university or law college that'll say, yeah, corporate law is okay, but criminal law, no, we don't need that. But in teacher training, it's, yeah, well, cognitive psychology, they don't need that. And I just can't relate to that. My dream would be improve initial teacher training based upon a curriculum in which the teachers learn the subject they're teaching, learn how we learn the pedagogy, learn the tools that they can make use of, and then learn about how to manage the class. If you do it in that way, and I say it in that order, not that one is more important, but if you know your subject and you know how people learn, then you can choose the proper instructional approach, what you in America call pedagogy, what we call didactics. You can choose the proper instructional approach if you know what you're going to teach and how people learn. Based upon that, I can choose the instructional intervention. If I've chosen that, my next step is, and how am I going to achieve that? What tools am I going to use? I'm going to lecture, I'm going to use virtual reality, augmented reality, am I going to, whatever. What tools am I going to make use of? And finally, how do I make sure that there's a safe, psychologically safe climate in which kids can learn? That should be the basis of every initial teacher training curriculum. If the curriculum leaves out any one of those five, all of the PD that you do won't really help.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself, Paul.
Thank you very, very much.
You're invited back anytime. This is the season finale before I go off into the summer, so we had to go out with the fireworks. It was
how many nasty letters I get from people.
Don't worry, only like 10 people watch the show. We're fine.
Okay.
So it's been amazing. It's amazing having you on. Listeners, thank you so much for such a wonderful season and for supporting me. You know how to get in contact with me. Paul, how do they get in touch with you? But I will be putting those things in the show notes.
You can follow me on Twitter. You can email me at paul@kirschner.ed.nl or paul.kirschner@ou.nl. You can find me on LinkedIn. I never make use of Twitter or LinkedIn for anything other than education and psychology. I don't tweet about my children or my dogs or things like that, or that I'm at the bakery, or boy, I saw this great movie. So if you want to follow me, if you want to get in touch with me, those are the best ways.
Perfect. And with that, let's go ahead and end the episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Kirschner.
Paul, please. You're very welcome, Zach. Mr. Groeschel.